All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Department of Energy's Carbon Management Day webinar. It is December 1st, 12:01 Eastern Time, and we are here to talk about carbon, element weight 12.01, and what the Department of Energy is doing to build out a carbon management ecosystem. My name is Noah Deitch, and I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Carbon Management here at DOE. And I'm excited for an agenda today that's packed with information about what DOE is doing on carbon management and why we think it's so important for a climate strategy. Before we get in, I just wanted to give a few minutes of opening remarks and to start with what we actually mean when we say carbon management. We think about this as a system of technologies that are interconnected. At the beginning, technologies that can capture carbon from existing emission sources like power plants and industrial facilities that might be impractical to decarbonize with another method in the near term, transporting that CO2, and then ultimately converting it into a valuable product and or storing that CO2 deep underground in geologic formations. The reason that we're working on this entire system of technologies is because it's essential for us meeting our mid-century climate goals. The mid-century strategy that the United States published at the beginning of this administration outlined a critical role for carbon management in helping us to get to net zero by mid-century economy-wide. While the overall contribution of carbon management to the economy-wide decarbonization might be relatively small, almost 20% of what needs to be done, it still is going to require an absolutely large effort. Because while the carbon management industry has been around for decades, and we have lots of R&D, we have tens of millions of tons of CO2 that's been stored in dozens of commercial projects, we haven't yet seen this industry lift off and achieve the commercial scale and the pace of deployment that's required to actually meet these climate goals. The Department of Energy last year published a report outlining what we think it's going to take for commercial liftoff in this field. And we've been focusing our efforts here at DOE on exactly that. How do we make sure that carbon management can be a key piece of our climate strategy? What's also important is that in order for carbon management to work as a climate strategy, it also has to work for communities, for the environment, and for workers. And so here at DOE and at this webinar today, we're not just going to talk about what our R&D priorities are and how DOE is focused on supporting pilots, demonstration, and early financing of projects to see the emergence of carbon management clusters and eventually hubs. But we're going to talk about how we are supporting the implementation of these projects in a way that provides community benefits, that mitigates against any environmental risks, and focuses on creating high-quality jobs. The last thing is we are in the midst of the kickoff of the COP meetings, where the world is focused once again on climate action. And carbon management is a key piece of that global story too. The United States, with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, is a global leader on carbon management almost overnight. And there's a huge opportunity for us to elevate the work that we do here in the US and the technologies that we pioneer and start to demonstrate to have that scale globally where it can have an impact far beyond what it will have just here in the US. And so we're excited to explain how our efforts here can really be on the vanguard of this industry globally. With that, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Mark Kukevich, who's going to walk us through what DOE is doing at a more detailed level when it comes to carbon management. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Noah. So thanks everyone for participating in our Carbon Management Day. So what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is cover what is carbon management and why is it important. So if we go to the next slide. So first, what is carbon management? And Noah teed this up, and I will go into a little more detail. We think about carbon management as a system of technologies to capture or remove carbon dioxide and then dispose of it in some manner. So the first step in this process is capturing carbon dioxide or CO2 emissions. And this can take two forms. First is capturing it from point sources, such as power plants that burn carbon-based fuels, such as natural gas, or industrial manufacturing facilities like cement and steel that either utilize carbon-based fuels to power their operations or provide steam, or where CO2 is a byproduct of that manufacturing process itself. There are a number of ways that carbon dioxide can be go back, please. There are a number of ways carbon dioxide can be captured from point sources, but the conventional way today is through liquids known as solvents that react with CO2. The CO2 is then released in a concentrated form by increasing the temperature of the solvent to release the CO2 or changing the pressure. The department's exploring innovative ways to reduce the cost of capture, such as solid sorbents, membranes, and cryogenic processes. The second way to capture CO2 is through removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. This can be done through liquid solvent approaches similar to point source capture, or through solid sorbents, which act as filters to remove the CO2. There are also other various ways to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, such as biological approaches, or utilizing minerals that react with CO2 to form rocks, or even removing CO2 from seawater. The next step is, once that CO2 is captured, is transporting it to either a carbon storage site or where it can be converted into products such as building materials. And depending on the location of the captured CO2 to the storage site, sometimes this transportation step can occur directly on site or not at all, or the need for transportation is minimized, or in some cases, the transport can be tens of miles. This transportation can occur through pipelines, ships, rail, or truck. Today in the United States, there are over 5,000 miles of carbon dioxide pipelines that transport tens of millions of tons of CO2 each year. In other places throughout the world, transporting carbon dioxide by ship is being explored and developed. Finally, the CO2 is then either converted or stored. And conversion can occur through various methods such as biological approaches, catalytic or mineralization routes that convert the CO2 and other chemicals such as either hydrogen or other chemical inputs into products such as fuels, chemicals, or building materials. Finally, storage typically refers to storage of carbon dioxide in geologic formations. And historically, vast amounts of carbon dioxide have been stored today in the United States, while CO2 has been used for enhanced oil recovery. Today, what we're doing at the department are looking at ways to store CO2 in broader geologic formations, working with our partners for the sole purpose of storing the CO2. This requires projects to go through rigorous permitting and approval process that involves characterization of the formation, siting of injection wells, and detailed monitoring plans to ensure secure storage of carbon dioxide. Today, these technologies exist, and what we'll hear about later from some of my colleagues are the funding opportunities, the policies that are in place to help facilitate the development, demonstration, and deployment of the full carbon management value chain to meet the climate challenge. If we go to the next slide. So why do we need carbon management? Global modeling scenarios indicate that to achieve net zero emissions, carbon management is an absolute necessity as part of a portfolio of technology options. In many industries, for example, such as cement, there are no other options as the manufacturing process itself inherently produces carbon dioxide, and the only way to remove it is by capturing it. Additionally, it is becoming increasingly more likely that carbon removal will need to play a role in order to achieve climate goals. The chart at the right is the recently updated net zero emissions scenario from IEA, the International Energy Agency's net zero roadmap, and it indicates that carbon management, labeled here as CCUS, or carbon capture, utilization, and storage, is essential to meeting global targets. And while the percentage may appear small on this slide, this represents carbon management deployment on a gigaton scale globally. We go to the next slide. So as that previous IEA chart showed, carbon management is part of a portfolio of options to meet net zero emissions targets. It is also part of a portfolio of options to decarbonize various industrial and manufacturing processes. This chart is from the recent DOE Commercial Liftoff Report on industrial decarbonization. And it shows that even within one particular industrial plant, a number of decarbonization options will likely be required to achieve full decarbonization, such as energy efficiency, fuel switching, electrification, and of course, carbon management. And as you can see, the various options to decarbonize the industrial sector are at various stages of development. Carbon management, shown on the top row, is in various stages of demonstration and deployment throughout these sectors. And it has the capability, along with other technologies, to lead to full decarbonization of multiple industries. Go to the next slide. So finally, I just want to wrap up by showing the latest statistics from the Global CCS Institute's Global Status Report. The chart shows significant increasing interest throughout the world in demonstration and deployment of carbon management. Over the past decade, we have seen nearly a doubling of operational plants, and over the past year, a significant increase in the number of plants under construction throughout the world. And there are many more in advanced stages of development. What is driving this interest is not just the recognition in global modeling scenarios of the importance of carbon management, but also the growing establishment of regulatory frameworks and policies to incentivize carbon management's development, demonstration, and deployment. So I want to thank you all for your interest today, and I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker, Sarah Forbes, the Deputy Director for the Office of Carbon Management Technologies, who will talk about some of these policies and funding opportunity announcements. Thank you.
Hello, and happy Carbon Management Day. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I will be building on Mark's comments and talking a bit more. Before I get started, I want to say my remarks are going to focus a lot on what we're doing across the department, not just within the Office of Fossil Energy Carbon Management, but DOE-wide. And I'm going to focus on the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act and some of the new things that are happening as a result of those policies. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our base R&D program. We have research happening across 5 divisions, including hydrogen with carbon management, point source carbon capture, carbon transport and storage, carbon dioxide removal, and carbon dioxide conversion. And there's a tremendous body and an amount of research that's happening. Due to time limits, we don't have time to talk about all of that. So I'm going to focus on the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Next. This is a screenshot of from a database that's compiled by an NGO called the Clean Air Task Force. And what you can see is a tremendous number of projects that are being planned. These are all in the carbon capture and storage space. They span many different industries, many different geologies and geographies. But one of the things, and this uptick in industry-led effort is thanks largely to the Inflation Reduction Act and the increase to boost in the 45Q tax credit. And I just wanted to highlight there's a lot of activity, but we still need more efforts to enable commercial liftoff. And so the things that I'm going to talk about today are what the department is doing to enable that commercial liftoff. Next. I already mentioned the 45Q tax credit. The 45Q tax credit has been around since 2008. It received a significant boost in the Inflation Reduction Act. The maximum credit value that you can get if you're doing direct air capture combined with geologic storage is $180 a ton. There are lesser credit values for point source carbon capture combined with geologic storage. Since the Inflation Reduction Act boosted the 45Q tax credit, which also enabled direct pay, that Clean Air Task Force map that I just showed received many more points. 45Q alone isn't enough to enable commercial liftoff. The bipartisan infrastructure law included funding for pilots and demos, and I'm going to go into some detail about that. To really receive at scale, we will also need market mechanisms such as carbon credits. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, which you'll hear more about during the fireside chat. I'll talk a little bit about our CDR purchase prize and how we're looking at a first of a kind government procurement to unlock and enable liftoff. Next. The bipartisan infrastructure law included funding for industrial and power plant capture, both integrated demos and large scale pilots. That's $3.5 billion combined. The Office of Clean Energy Demonstration is managing that. For direct air capture hubs. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a future slide. And we also have a prize competition, both a pre-commercial prize competition as well as our procurement prize at $115 million. Carbon transport systems received funding for front-end engineering design studies at $100 million. We've already awarded some of those projects. A front-end engineering design study is needed to enable. It basically gives you the engineering details you need to build something. So I'll talk a little bit about the front-end engineering design studies we've done for carbon capture, but we're also now doing them for carbon transport systems. We also have the CIFIA program, which is managed by the Loan Program Office with support from our Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. CIFIA stands for Carbon Infrastructure and Investment Act, and that's a loan that a company can get for building a pipeline with extra capacity beyond what it needs to match its source and sink. In addition to the loans under the CIFIA program that companies can get a consultation for today, we also have future growth grants, and I'll talk a little bit in more detail about that. But a future growth grant can pair together with the CIFIA loan or can be separate. And last but not least, the bipartisan infrastructure law included funding for carbon storage validation and testing. I'll talk about our carbon safe program. It was $2.5 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law, and also for carbon utilization at $310 million. You will hear after I finish my presentation from my colleagues about some of the provisions that are part of any bill-funded activity that relate to new requirements for community engagement, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, Justice 40, and identifying quality jobs. Next slide. I've mentioned and I've tried to emphasize, I'm talking about work that's happening across the department. The Office of Fossil Energy is an applied program office, and we're doing lower TRL R&D efforts focused and needed to realize these technologies. The Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the work that they're managing to realize the direct air capture hubs and the hydrogen hubs that were part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. I've talked about the Loan Program Office and the CIFIA program for carbon dioxide pipeline infrastructure. We also have the Office of Science funding basic research at the national labs that's relevant to this space and everything we're talking about on Carbon Management Day. And our ARPA-E office, which funds those lower TRL high risk, high reward efforts. And those are supported by other parts of DOE who sometimes, who we need to work together with to realize this, like our policy office, our Office of Technology Transitions, our International Affairs Office. Carbon management and achieving commercial liftoff is really a whole DOE effort. Next. The carbon negative shot is a key North Star as we think about carbon management. It sets a goal of $100 a ton of CDR by 2032. It's pathway agnostic, gigaton scale, and inclusive of the wide range of carbon dioxide removal technologies. Next. As part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, additional front engineering design studies for point source carbon capture are being selected. But I wanted to share this slide because we've already, through our research and development over the past 20 years, done front-end engineering design studies and pre-front-end engineering design studies for real plants, for coal-fired power plants, natural gas-fired power plants, as well as direct air capture and industrial. These projects, the first rounds of these projects are nearing completion, and we're working on summary reports that will describe the results. But without front-end engineering design studies and the type of information that we get out of those, projects can't move forward and do carbon capture. Next. Carbon storage. We began looking at regional source sink matching for carbon storage, transport and storage in about 2003, when we started the regional carbon sequestration partnerships. The research that preceded that were a few field scale injections that were happening in places like New Mexico, Texas, and Appalachia. Based on that success, based on the regional partnership program, by 2016, we started the Carbon Safe program. Carbon Safe is designed to realize turnkey commercial scale geologic storage and to offset the risks associated with selecting a site. You can't do geologic storage without site-specific information. And what Carbon Safe does is it allows projects to begin with the feasibility study and over time collect the information needed to apply for a Class 6 permit. In 2023, thanks to the bill funding, the Carbon Safe, we're moving into our phase 3 and 3.5 and phase 4 projects. And by the time a project reaches phase 4, it should have all of the information it needs to apply for a Class 6 permit. Phase 4 also would fund the development of your monitoring wells. Next. This slide provides a bit more detail on the Carbon Safe program. What I want to emphasize is projects will enter various phases and they may not go through all 4 phases. For example, we've funded a number of Carbon Safe projects that have completed, and they've, for example, one of the projects that was a phase 2 project was finished from a DOE perspective and went on to apply for a Class 6 permit. We do have funding opportunity announcements for Carbon Safe. We announced selections this month and plan to release additional funding opportunity announcements in the future. Next. This map shows both the feed studies that I mentioned earlier. Those are the little plants. You can see the feed studies for cement, chemicals, direct air capture, ethanol, natural gas, hydrogen, and coal, together with the locations where our Carbon Safe projects are. We've funded up till now projects in both phase 2 and phase 3 in geographic regions across the country. I will say these are the same areas where, through our regional carbon sequestration partnership and our research that began in the late 1990s, we've developed an understanding of the geology and what it takes to do responsible carbon management in these areas. Next. I want to talk just a little bit about some of the news and the new things that are happening. Our carbon dioxide removal prize is out. Submissions are due on December 14th. Winners will walk through the phases. So phase 1 winners will be eligible for phase 2. Phase 2 winners will be eligible to apply for phase 3. And the amount of the award, similar to other prizes, ramps up with each phase. The bullets outline the 4 pathways that are eligible: direct air capture, biomass with carbon removal and storage, enhanced weathering, mineralization, as well as alternative or managed carbon sinks. Next. I mentioned the future growth grants. The notice of intent was released in August. A future growth grant would fund up to 80% of the construction costs for carbon dioxide transportation. The projects could be used together with a CFIA loan, but it's not necessary. And future growth grants could apply to, the CFIA loans are for CO2 pipelines, but future growth grants could apply to other modes of transportation. Next. Oh, I'm sorry, on that slide, we are expecting a funding opportunity for this to be announced in the near future. Next. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the hubs, the direct air capture hubs and the hydrogen hubs. As I mentioned before, OSED also manages, and this is the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations within DOE, manages the carbon capture demonstrations, which were part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as the large scale pilots. Next. The regional direct air capture hubs selection was announced in August. These include projects that are at the feasibility stage, the design phase, as well as the build stage. In the next two slides, I'm going to show the locations of those. I want to emphasize that as the projects are selected, they're selected to begin negotiation for award, and so that's an important nuance. And just, you know, these projects are being in the process of being awarded. The feasibility projects will last for up to 2 years. The design phase projects will also last for up to 2 years, and the build projects may take up to 10 years. Next. This map shows the locations for those feasibility and design studies for direct air capture. It also shows it shows that together with where some of the feed studies that we've already funded, and those have been on a number of maps. But you know, give an idea of the juxtaposition to some of our other funded efforts. Next, the two large scale projects that I guess large scale isn't the right word. They're all at large scale, but these are the build phase projects and that were selected under the direct air capture hub FOA in Texas as well as in Louisiana. Next. I want to close just by, I mentioned that we're doing research in fossil energy and carbon management on hydrogen with carbon management. OSED manages the regional clean hydrogen hubs. This announcement was made in October. It represents a diversity in terms of types of feedstock for hydrogen, ranging from renewable energy to electrolysis, as well as natural gas with carbon management. And with that, I'll close my remarks. Thank you all for your attention, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
Thanks, Sarah. Next slide, please. Okay, well, hi there, everyone. It's great to see so many folks joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mary Ellen Kwong, and I serve as an engagement advisor in FECM's Office of Carbon Management. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Kelly Roma, and we're going to update you on FECM's engagement activities, our efforts on community benefit plans, and our intent to launch a responsible carbon management initiative. Next slide. So you heard from Mark on how carbon management technologies can support a broad portfolio of clean energy solutions to meet net zero emission goals. And Sarah just highlighted the extensive federal funding available to deploy carbon management. But engagement with communities and stakeholders is critically important for carbon management and other clean energy solutions to be successful. It's critical so that we maximize economic, environmental, and societal benefits for communities and stakeholders, and to reach the deployment pace and scale needed to make a difference for climate. And in recognition of this, DOE established the Community Benefit Plan Framework, which is a key tool for requiring our funding recipients to provide meaningful engagement opportunities to potential host communities and other stakeholders. Now, that framework is far more comprehensive than just community engagement, and Kelly will speak to that shortly. But what I want to note here is that DOE understands the importance of conducting our own engagement. And as such, DOE teams have been engaging around the country where project development is expected to occur. Our focus here is to help ensure community and stakeholder participation, to listen to community inputs, and to increase awareness about carbon management technologies, funding opportunities, and the community benefit plan process. And for FECM in particular, as we connect with communities and other stakeholders, we're really leaning on the guiding principles articulated in our engagement framework, which is pictured on the slide here. In 2023, we have either hosted or sponsored several engagement opportunities that integrate these principles. Staff across all of FECM have supported these events, not just Kelly and myself. And to name a few, in February, we hosted a workshop on carbon management and critical minerals in Anchorage, Alaska. In March and again in October, we hosted a strategy forum for Western tribes regarding carbon management and critical minerals. First in Moab, Utah, and then later in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And one of the more recent events that we have sponsored was the Carbon Management Dialogue in Houston, Texas. Next slide, please. So I'd like to take some time to highlight the Houston Dialogue in particular, not only because it's recent, but also because we were really fortunate to have many local partners on the ground to help us shape the event. The City of Houston and Rice University, with support from a science education firm called Climate Now, kindly offered to host the event. And Metro, a light rail provider in Houston, offered transportation assistance to the venue. And representatives from local community organizations, many of which are listed on the right of the slide here, volunteered their time and expertise to help shape the agenda for the 2 days that we were in Houston. Through working with them, we learned a lot about what it means to put on a community-centered event, and we're grateful, very grateful for their close collaboration with us. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are some photos from the event itself, showing activity from the listening and plenary sessions and breakout groups. And to be considerate of different schedules for work and other commitments, we held the first part of the event during the evening and the second part the next day during the daytime. Both days featured community voices throughout all programming, and Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner and FECM Assistant Secretary Brad Crabtree were present for the entire 2-day event. Reverend James Caldwell, a trusted community representative, addressed the audience alongside the mayor and the assistant secretary. And we also had representatives on hand from other DOE offices, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration to answer technical questions. The event was well attended. We had approximately 100 people participate in person and about 50 people online, and the audience was composed of a mix of industry, community leaders and members, EJ advocates, academia, and local officials. So overall, the event facilitated relationship building and shared learning, which were 2 key goals that we had. The community organizations that helped us design the agenda for this recent event have agreed to work with us again to co-design another educational event for the spring. So we're looking forward to kicking off the planning process for that. Additionally, FECM intends to sponsor a series of community workshops next year in other areas of the country where project development is being considered. We hope to share more specifics on those at a later date. Next slide, please. So a good way to keep tabs on our engagement events is to check out the event calendar on our engagement webpage featured on this slide here. And I'll note that on the domestic subpage, we have a resource library that we often add new resources to. That's pictured on the left here. Actually, we just recently added a sampling of resources on safety and risk assessment related to carbon capture, transport, and storage. And in the near future, we expect to add more educational content in the form of FAQs, fact sheets, and videos. Our goal here is to make sure this content is responsive to the feedback we receive from communities and other stakeholders during our on-the-ground engagements. And with that, I'll hand it off to Kelly. Thanks, everyone.
Hi there, thank you, Mary Ellen, and thank you all for tuning in today. My name is Kelly Romer, and I work with Mary Ellen on the Carbon Management Engagement Team. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about our efforts in the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management to help ensure deployments of carbon management technology and infrastructure are done in the most responsible ways. So one major effort to institutionalize responsible deployment practices is through the Community Benefits Plan framework. This framework aims to ensure that projects that receive public funding, particularly from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, create tangible benefits for communities and workers where the projects are located. The Community Benefits Plans framework is based on a set of 4 priorities: to invest in America's workforce, engage communities and labor stakeholders, advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and implement the Justice 40 framework to ensure that benefits of these projects and investments flow to disadvantaged communities. The Community Benefits Plan is part of the application process for carbon management projects and requires project developers to state how they're going to approach engaging with community stakeholders and work with labor to establish workplace standards and conduct workforce development, how they're going to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and ensure that benefits flow to host communities and mitigate or eliminate potential impacts. These plans are scored in merit review, just like the technical project information and plans, which means that how robust a community benefits plan is really matters for project funding decisions. And in scoring these community benefit plans, the Department of Energy and the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management consults with experts and practitioners who work specifically in these fields of engagement, environmental justice, labor, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Next slide, please. So at the program level, we take seriously what we learn from our on-the-ground community engagements with leaders and stakeholders from the events that Mary Ellen described, and we use what we learn to inform not only our approach to future engagement, but also to develop our guidance for community benefit plans and our trainings for applicants. So encourage folks to visit the website on the left, where you can find our office's guidance for developing the elements of these community benefit plans. I'd also like to highlight an upcoming training for project applicants focused on community benefit plan development. This webinar will be Monday, December 4th, and you can find more information on the USEA event page. This QR code will take you to the link to register. Here, we're going to focus on the Department of Energy guidance for these plans across different phases of carbon management projects, as well as more insight from the Office of Energy Justice and Equity to implement the Justice 40 initiative and showcase some insight and lessons learned from examples from community engagement practitioners. And now I'd like to introduce another effort to strengthen responsible deployment of carbon management projects, including those beyond the Department of Energy's portfolio. Next slide, please. So earlier this fall, the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management announced an intent to launch a responsible carbon management initiative. This initiative aims to extend the practices embodied in the Community Benefit Plan framework to projects that are funded entirely by the private sector. This is an opportunity for all projects, not just DOE funded projects, to demonstrate their alignment with responsible deployment practices. And this initiative aims to recognize and encourage project developers to pursue the highest levels of safety, environmental stewardship, accountability, community engagement, labor standards, and ensure societal benefits throughout carbon management project deployment. The initiative emphasizes transparency and learning through greater data and information sharing among industry, governments, communities, and other stakeholders. Next slide. The request for information, which was open for 6 weeks, sought public comment on 11 draft principles for responsible carbon management, as well as the proposed structure of the initiative. We want to thank many of you for carefully reviewing the request for information and providing thoughtful comments. We received over 80 comments, which are published in the Federal Register. The Department of Energy and our office staff are currently reviewing the comments to make recommendations to finalize these principles and to inform the structure of the initiative. So please stay tuned for the next steps that are coming for the Responsible Carbon Management Initiative. Next slide. So now that we have a dedicated engagement team in the Office of Carbon Management, we are really eager to stay connected. So please reach out and sign up on the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management's website to be informed of our engagement activities. Thank you for your time today. And with that, I'll hand it off to my colleague, Rory.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Really appreciate it. And it's great to hear about all of our engagement efforts across the department. My name is Rory Jacobson. I'm the Senior Advisor at the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, and I get to moderate today's Fireside Chat with two U.S. Department of Energy carbon management leaders. And as I get into this conversation, I do want to remind you all that we will make slides from these presentations available, and we'll also put out the recording. So if you're also trying to screenshot all of these awesome diagrams and some of the figures that we've shown you, don't worry, we're going to publish all of them. And so first, I have the privilege of introducing Noah Deitch. He is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Carbon Management for the Department of Energy's Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. He kicked us off today. In this role, he oversees fossil energy's carbon management programs, which focuses on minimizing the climate and environmental impacts of fossil energy and industrial processes through carbon management technology pathways. Also, as my colleague Sarah Forbes said, this is an all of DOE effort. Carbon management really spans our entire Department of Energy. So I'm also really pleased to introduce Todd Schrader, who is Director of Program Management for the Department of Energy's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, or OSED. In this role, Todd Schrader is responsible for providing project management oversight for the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration projects to ensure investments accelerate deployment, market adoption, and equitable transition to a decarbonized energy system. And so, unlike a lot of our presentations today, we're actually going to be relatively unscripted in this conversation. I'd like to have a dialogue between the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management and Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations to discuss sort of how carbon management bridges gaps across the entire department in our clean energy strategy. And so to kick things off, maybe I can ask Noah to talk a little bit about the work that our office does in advancing carbon management technologies.
Happy to, Rory. And in the nature of the unscripted aspect here, beautiful Zoom background makes me feel right at home on our fireside chat here. But in all seriousness, our office is really focused on the earlier stage R&D. Think about it one step before we get to commercialization. What are the breakthroughs and demonstrations that we need to do? And we span the entire carbon management value chain here at FECM. So everything that Mark mentioned at the kickoff, there's dedicated research programs there that roughly $450 million a year innovation budget that Sarah mentioned as part of the base appropriations has grown steadily over the past 20 or so years that DOE has worked on this. And we've really been focused on maturing technologies across the value chain in two real dimensions. The first is what are all the different sources that we can do carbon management on from a capture and carbon removal perspective, as well as what are the different technologies that can be applied in those various contexts, as well as on the infrastructure side in terms of transportation and storage. And how do we understand what is actually happening to CO2 when it gets injected underground, and how can we manage that safely and transparently and really robustly at increasing volumes? Because we're not doing carbon management as a niche solution. We need it to be broadly applicable, and that requires a significant amount of science and engineering.
Great, thanks so much, Noah. And so, Todd, a lot of my colleagues have talked about some of the programs that your office is running. The Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management has been, investing in research and development on these technologies for a long time. As Noah said, can you talk to us a little bit about how Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations is approaching and advancing carbon management technologies broadly?
Sure, and glad to be here. I think, when the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed, it was a recognition that there has been tremendously good work performed out of FECM through the years, but there was sort of this hole in how you get it to demonstration scale and commercialization. And so the bipartisan infrastructure law created Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations to seamlessly work with FECM to keep advancing it. And so with that, we have, as you saw earlier, I believe Sarah was, who talked about the three areas that OSED looks at: carbon capture at point sources and direct air capture hubs themselves. And so our efforts along those lines have been to bring those technologies into the demonstration scale. To that effect, as was mentioned earlier, 2 DAC hubs have been selected for negotiation. We're working on that now, one in Texas and one in Louisiana. And then we also have some integrated feed studies that were selected about 7 months ago, that are wrapping up negotiations and moving forward. And they fit in, I think, very well with advancing what FECM has been doing up to this point into the next phase to get to true full-scale adoption of this. One of the keys is the department has a lot of money to do a lot of good work, but it's really going to take industry to adopt much of this work to get to commercial liftoff. And so what we're doing is getting us to that point moving forward.
That's super helpful. And I've also been really encouraged by the response from civil society, the private sector, and engaging with the department early and often, I think, across all of our solicitations. And so, this time last year, we really just put out the regional direct air capture hub solicitation. And now, with the year of progress underway, I'd love to hear from you both about some of the efforts and I think successes that we've seen early in this program. And so, the Department of Energy, across both Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations and Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, have announced up to $1.2 billion in selections for potential projects across the direct air capture field. And Todd, you sort of got into this, but I'd love for you to talk a bit about how some of the topic areas that we've invested in are sort of reinforcing it. And we're both thinking about feasibility studies, front-end engineering and design, but also some commercial projects that are ready to go.
Sure. I think this funding opportunity announcement that was announced, like you mentioned, about a year ago, really demonstrates the way FECM and OSED are working very closely together. It had 3 topic areas, the last being the commercialization, and that was the building of the first 2 DAC hubs themselves. As you said, we're in negotiations for up to $1.2 billion for these direct air capture hubs. And again, this is the technology that literally pulls the CO2 out of the atmosphere. This is legacy CO2. It's already in the atmosphere and permanently stores it moving forward. Once up and running, to just give you a sense of this, they will move 2 million metric tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere annually. That's equivalent to about 500,000 cars coming off the road. So it's starting to make a real impact in what we're doing. Again, each selectee, we're in negotiations for a cooperative agreement, which means the government does have substantial involvement in the project to ensure the government interests are protected and to ensure all aspects of the project move forward, including community benefits. I think Mary Ellen and Kelly gave a really good discussion of what's expected in community benefits, and absolutely true for OSED also going forward. And so There will be additional funding, and we hope to see more regional DAC hubs in the future from this. But for now, we have these two working on. But a real key piece of this was also the first two topic areas, which are a little bit more upstream that'll hopefully feed those further ones. And so I think Noah can certainly talk about that work and how it'll eventually move in to help us with deploying more DAC hubs in the future.
Yeah, Todd, and not only is this a great example of how FECM and OSED have collaborated on implementing the infrastructure law, but I think just stepping back, this is one area that has seen incredible collaboration from DOE, Congress, and the private sector as well. Rewind even 5 years ago, the amount of funding in the public sector for direct air capture, we were talking about $3 million. The fact that we're talking about $3.5 billion and megaton scale projects is just an enormous advancement, and is a testament to the cooperation across sectors of society and across the political spectrum to prioritize this piece of the climate solution puzzle. And as Todd mentioned, getting to that 1 million ton scale is really, really important. But it's one of those things that's difficult to rush, that we need to first figure out what works at a smaller scale, what works at a mid-sized scale, and then at a large scale. This is the one thing that we've learned from the history of clean energy demonstrations and carbon management demonstrations in particular, is you can't really skip steps as we engineer bigger and bigger projects. And so that's where FECM really comes in, is to make sure that there's a pipeline of innovation that can provide funding for not just those two next big direct air capture hubs, but we think there are going to have to be dozens across the United States. 1 million tons is a great unit size, but what we ultimately need is to have billions of tons of direct air capture deployed globally. And the US can be a leader in that. We think it's a great opportunity to transform industries, especially those where there's been a reliance on fossil fuels in the past. The same workforces can be deployed to scale up direct air capture. And I think it's a real opportunity for the US in particular, given our abundance of geologic storage and potential for clean electricity and power and heat rather. And so we're just really excited to support that front of the funnel of the innovation side. We've helped fund 19 studies, 14 on the concept side, 5 on the more detailed engineering space. But collectively, this gives us over 20 direct air capture projects that DOE is working to advance at various stages, really matched to where the field is from the industry perspective. We're able to meet industry where they are and help them with the resources that they need. And I think one of the amazing things about the 19 smaller scale projects that DOE is supporting spans from Alaska to Florida. This is really a United States wide opportunity. And it's one where I think we're going to see an enormous amount of innovation, not just in the technology aspects of this, but in the business models and really defining where we can get economies of scale and creating hubs with direct air capture, but ultimately not just direct air capture, it's integrating into things like hydrogen hubs so we can support direct air capture and CO2 conversion into valuable products. It's integrating with other types of carbon removal solutions so that we're really creating a carbon removal industry here, not necessarily just a direct air capture industry. And so I think it's a great opportunity to build on. And the vision here is not just for megaton scale hubs. It's really an industry that is supporting decarbonization and ultimately negative emissions here in the US and globally. And I think we're laying a really strong foundation for scaling that here with those initial DAC hub awards.
Really helpful, Noah. And so I like this idea of, we see projects all the way from Alaska to Florida. And regional capacities are really important contributing factor there. Can you talk a little bit about the announcement that Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management put out today, thinking about advancing technical assistance at the regional level, particularly for carbon storage?
Yeah, absolutely, Rory. So this is a $40 million funding opportunity to support regional initiatives that really provide technical assistance about how we scale carbon management writ large. That at DOE recognize this is a technical enterprise at heart. It's something that team here has been working on for 20 plus years, and so have an enormous experience with all of the ins and outs of the technology across the value chain. But we recognize that this is not the case in many of the regulatory agencies across the United States, and with many of the communities that are going to interact with these projects and figure out how to deploy them, as Mary Ellen and Kelly were talking about, in a way that supports those communities, provides benefits, really reinforces the workforce opportunities and protects the environment. And so that's really what this funding opportunity is about. How do we make sure that the wealth of knowledge that the community who has been working on carbon management over the past decades, which exists in the academy, it exists in civil society, in industry, and as well as in governments at the state and national level, or really around the world. How do we make sure that we can provide support to scale that knowledge, disseminate it in a way that stakeholders can really understand and interact with, and make sure that when we deploy carbon management, we're doing it with the most robust science and engineering foundation that we can, and we're really supporting those community objectives in parallel.
It's great and awesome to hear that the department's working on this. In addition to just climate mitigation, which we've talked a lot about today, there are also a bunch of other benefits that can come with carbon management technologies, both at the point source and carbon removal technologies, as well as conversion. Todd, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the other, sort of non-climate benefits we see in carbon management.
Absolutely. I think one of them was I think Noah just hit on it. We are building the biggest plants in the world. These megaton scale plants are hundreds of times bigger than anything there. This is a chance to get build American competitiveness and American industry in this area to be world leaders. So I think there's a definite economic benefit, not just to the local communities where these facilities are being built, but the supply chain, the intellectual knowledge, the entire value chain for this industry. I think this gives us ability to really advance American competitiveness in this area. And then the other piece, again, we talked about this. This is a real chance for frontline communities to be involved, to get the benefits. Yes, everyone benefits from CO2 coming out of the atmosphere, but the jobs, the training, the good corporate stewardship, all of these mean these benefits are flowing to these communities themselves to hopefully build support for this in the future for expansion. Again, I'll emphasize one thing that Noah said. 4 plants and 4 million tons is great, but we need lots and lots and lots more. And so this is laying the groundwork, I think, for an expansion of this technology.
That's great. It's really exciting to hear about the economic opportunity associated with some of these technologies. Our office has a long history in investing in some of the research and development aspects of nascent carbon management technologies. Can we talk about some of the other public health and community benefits that come along with carbon management?
Yeah, of course. And maybe I can talk about some of the research that we've been scaling recently into the public health side of this equation. One of the most important questions is what happens beyond the greenhouse gas impacts to the other air and water pollution when you build carbon capture. And I think one of the most important lessons that we've learned is that the carbon capture systems themselves don't work on polluting flue gas streams. The technology is not designed for that. So it's either deployed in places where the flue gas is already clean, or significant investments are made in order to make that air possible to do carbon management on. And so I think there's an important intersection there where we're really making sure that we're cleaning up the non-greenhouse gas aspects of this by how the technology just works, right? And that aside, I think there are lots of ways to think about how we can make sure that the systems themselves are not creating any negative unintended pollution. And so there are campaigns that we are running right now at the National Carbon Capture Center down in Alabama, which is a real gem within the broader DOE and really a US ecosystem for carbon management that enables companies to come in and run small scale tests about how different technologies for carbon capture work and their cost and performance. And so tests have been going on there for years at this point. And part of the things that they've looked at is how do you operate systems to minimize any of the other unintended pollution. I think we're learning a ton, and all of that data that we've learned to date and we continue to learn will be integrated into some of the projects that Todd's team will ultimately be implementing. And we're going to make sure that the technologies that we support are doing best practices when it comes to not just the carbon capture aspect of this, but the broader environmental impacts of this. And so I think it's something that's really important, and we want to make sure that the information that we are learning can be communicated more broadly, and that we're insisting that folks think about carbon management not in the single greenhouse gas lens, but really as a broader pollution control technology, and to really think about it as providing those benefits to local air quality in addition to the global carbon management benefit.
That's really helpful, Noah. So it sounds like today we're talking about carbon, but there are also a whole suite of other environmental and public health benefits that come along with these technologies. And so I think continuing on the thread of community benefits, the Biden-Harris administration is committed to ensuring that carbon management projects are designed, built, and operated safely and responsibly. And so thinking about how we can be consistent with what the science is telling us in terms of benefits here, how do we respond to the needs and inputs of local communities? And how do we make sure that the projects live up to the commitments that they're thinking about in their community benefit plans? And maybe, Todd, I can start with you there.
Sure. I think first and foremost, it's communication. Outreach to communities. Certainly it's an expectation among our projects. And I think all the projects, as you heard earlier, robust two-way communication is very important. To that end, we actually have already started some communication. My office, OSED, had a community meeting in Lake Charles, and one of the DAC hubs, and also in Kingsville, Texas, earlier over the last couple of months. And that's to start that dialogue. And so I think that's a really important piece. But it's more than that also. It's understanding the plans for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's understanding how the benefits flow, the Justice 40 discussions themselves, and of course, good jobs. One of the things about jobs and looking forward is we may be a few years from construction, but you got to start thinking about that now. Are there ways you can invest in the community to have the workforce you need going forward? And more importantly, local workforce, so that they're there in the project and hopefully from the very long operating lives of these facilities. And so how are those good jobs, and how do we invest now in the good jobs? And so that's what we're working very closely with during the negotiations with the applicants, to hopefully when we get to award, we have these robust benefits and robust plans put forward to ensure all of those are taken care of. Again, we talked a little bit about the importance of these areas. When we make our investment decisions, what we call go points at various stages within the project itself, this will be an important piece. It's important as technology development, financing, project management. This is an important piece. Are we advancing those goals also moving forward? The really strong projects are the ones that have the community support, have their workforce support, and are well integrated into communities. And that's certainly what we're working hard with during negotiations with our partners or with the awardees to move those goals forward.
Thanks, Todd. I had the pleasure of being at that meeting in Lake Charles, and it's very clear that your office is extremely serious about a two-way dialogue. Noah, I know that our office isn't just thinking about infrastructure law projects or DOE projects. How are we more broadly advancing community benefits across carbon management projects that we're seeing in the private sector?
Yeah, it's a great question. And Roy, I think it comes down to the point that at the end of the day, these projects and really the entire US policy framework is government funded, but it's industry led. It requires industry to demonstrate leadership, not just in taking the subsidies that are available, but in walking the walk when it comes to the community engagement side. So we've provided a lot of resources to help industry with that. On our website, there's publicly available information about how we think companies can go about the best possible way of engaging with communities. But the first lesson that comes up over and over again is to start early. That folks need to go into communities where they think projects are going to happen before they've actually decided that they are going to build the project, and to understand what the community's needs are so that they can decide where to build projects first and foremost based on that community feedback, and then how, and understanding what benefits the community really wants to see. And in many cases, it's very possible to find a place where there's a strong case where the communities can benefit, but it's not going to happen if the project gets developed without that community input, and then communities are informed late in the process. And so that's not something that DOE can force. We make sure that when you come to us with a project, that you've done as good a job as possible. And we, as Todd mentioned, have really detailed and robust community benefit plan requirements. But at the end of the day, none of that's going to work if industry isn't going to step up at the beginning of the day and figure out where to put projects in the best place. And I think there's also a strong role for civil society here too. There's an enormous communications gap where carbon management might be familiar to everyone on this webinar. But at the end of the day, if you talk to the average community stakeholder about what carbon management is, you're likely to get blank looks. And that's just a fact that carbon management is not a day-to-day piece of life in any way, and ways that recycling or solar panels or EVs have increasingly become. And so there's just less of an awareness about what it is and all of those different aspects. And I think part of the challenge is it tends to be a very technical and engineering heavy enterprise. And so figuring out how to communicate that in ways where we're breaking down those communication barriers, and also providing an opportunity for communities to really opt in to projects in ways that are consistent with their values and their needs, is something where I think civil society can play a really strong role. And it's very important that the civil society, private industry, and the government are coordinated and aligned with how to make these projects happen, because without that, we're not going to get to where we need to go.
Yeah, no, I really like that notion of both civil society and the private sector really stepping up to address the challenge of carbon management. Maybe I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat more broadly about how Department of Energy is thinking about sort of coordination across all of these different carbon management programs. Todd, your office handles an entire suite of the carbon management portfolio. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about the integration of all of these different pieces, from transportation, point source capture, direct air capture? How are we prioritizing and how are we coordinating?
Absolutely. So I think, you've kind of heard the term a couple times, whole of DOE approach, and whole of industry approach. The OSED portfolio includes a large section of the industry out there. You remember earlier, I think Mark showed a slide about different ways you get to carbon management. And so I think within OSED, we have the ability to look at different parts and pieces of this problem. Earlier, it was mentioned, cement, hard to abate. We have a program, the Industrial Demonstration Program, that builds on a lot of work from FECM and EERE and other parts of the department to deploy in cement making plants today, carbon reduction capabilities. You heard about hydrogen hubs earlier. We're in negotiations for those right now, those 7 hubs. That will perhaps allow for, instead of burning a fossil fuel, you can burn hydrogen in your process, a cleaner fuel, things like that. And so we're looking at it across the entire integration of industry. And carbon management's an important piece of the back end part, if you will, carbon capture at the point source, direct air capture hubs, but there's also things we can do with making the process itself cleaner and making the fuel that you're using cleaner. So we're looking literally across everything it takes to get there. And I think it even goes further back outside of our department. You even heard efforts about critical minerals and things like that. I think it just reinforces the entire Department of Energy's efforts in these areas.
And Rory, I can also add that one of the key things that the Department of Energy does is collaborate not just within the department, but across the entire United States government. There's important intersections where we can provide technical assistance to colleagues at the Environmental Protection Agency as they think about Class 6 permitting, and the national labs play a critical role in helping to make sure that the applications that come in through that program are evaluated robustly. And similarly with colleagues in the Department of Interior about offshore permitting and some of the various other aspects. And so I think it's really important for us to not just coordinate internally, but to show how we are working as a whole of government, not just whole of DOE, in making sure that carbon management projects can advance in a really robust and responsible way.
Awesome. Thank you, Noah. And so I'm going to ask maybe one more question and then we'll go to the chat. But thinking about, in 2021, we had the bipartisan infrastructure law passed. And in 2022, we saw the Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law. Thinking more broadly about how we're tracking metrics across these two really important pieces of legislation, how is our office or how is our department more broadly thinking about success for these two pieces of policy and what outcomes are we looking towards? Maybe Noah, I can start with you on that one.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I think if we look forward, we know that we're going to need hundreds of megatons of carbon management within a few decades here to meet our net zero goals. And so what we're thinking about now is twofold. One is how do we build the infrastructure that can scale to meet that need? And two is how do we make sure that we can demonstrate carbon capture works, safe, it's cost effective, and is beneficial for communities across all of the various end sectors that will ultimately need it. And I think that's really the key in the next 5 years is to lay that foundation, because at the end of the day, we're not entirely sure how much carbon removal and carbon management writ large we're going to need to meet net zero. But what we want to do is be able to provide the tool set to scale up as needed and make sure that carbon management is not a headwind against the deployment of some of the other solutions that are ultimately coming down cost curves really rapidly and might be the right answer for industries in the not too distant future. We want to make sure that technologies like renewable energy and electrification and other types of fuel switching are not impeded by the scale up of carbon management, but rather complemented by that, and that we can get to net zero as quickly as we need to.
Do you want to expand on that at all, or do you want me to move to the chat?
No, I'll just say I completely agree. I think, one of the most important metrics, really, I don't actually have, a tick mark, but when we're thinking about this is industry liftoff, industry adoption. And I think Noah's his point is key. Let's get those barriers out of the way so industry does adopt these various solutions moving forward. So.
Super helpful. And so one of my favorite acronyms is popping up a lot in the chat, which is measurement, reporting, and verification. Now, you brought up this idea of really solidifying and demonstrating that carbon capture works and more broadly that carbon management works. Can you talk a little bit about the efforts that our department is undertaking and even our collaborations with OSED on how to think about measurement, reporting, and verification for these technologies?
Yeah, it's a great point, because at the end of the day, carbon management it's a waste management business, right? And what matters is that we can measure that it's providing that service of either preventing an emission from entering the atmosphere or removing and permanently storing that emission. And so we're going to need not just the tools, but the standards and the protocols for making sure that when carbon management happens, that we can with confidence claim that it happens and count that as an actual emission reduction or removal. And we are starting from a really strong foundation where EPA has developed really strong foundations, and the DOE has developed sensors and other types of tools to very accurately monitor what's happening in the subsurface, especially when we start to think about carbon removal. The process gets inherently more complex, just given the diversity of pathways and the nature of some of the more, as they say, open systems involving soils and oceans and so forth. We're going to need new tools, and DOE is working on it. ARPA-E has a great new program to develop sensors for ocean carbon removal, for example. But this is an area that's going to require continuous refinement and improvement. It's never going to be possible to track every single carbon molecule with 100% precision, but what we can do is figure out how to understand what's happening with enough confidence that we're able to make those really robust carbon accounting claims. And that's really where we need to head, is figuring that out. One of the key areas that we're doing that is through our CDR purchasing program, where DOE is not going to be developing those standards ourselves, but really relying on the community that's working on carbon removal to help surface what the best available practices are, and in turn identify some of those research needs for that continuous improvement. And in some cases, dictating where solutions need that measurement, reporting, and verification before they can really achieve that commercial liftoff, which might be the case in some of the carbon removal verticals in particular.
It's really helpful. And I know today is Carbon Management Day, but I'm seeing a lot of questions sort of about hydrogen hubs and more broadly, the role of carbon management in thinking about hydrogen. Todd, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the recent hydrogen hub selection and also the role of carbon management in clean hydrogen production.
Sure. Certainly, I think, we talked about it before, 7 hydrogen hubs selected for negotiation. We're in negotiation with them right now, regionally spread across the country. But many of those hubs do also rely on carbon management techniques to reduce their overall carbon footprint of the hydrogen generation. You probably have heard various colors for hydrogen. I won't go into that, but there's various ways you can make hydrogen, and carbon management is a tool we can use to make those processes cleaner as we make the hydrogen going forward. One of the things we look at, and it kind of builds on the last question a little bit too, is life cycle analysis. LCA is what it's often called. And we use, frankly, a tool that the national labs and FECM and others of our applied offices have generated through the years to look at the life cycle analysis of, is the carbon cleaner now than it was before? Are you making progress in this area? And life cycle analysis looks at not just the carbon, but the other pollutants that may be involved, things like that. And so certainly carbon management and overall pollutant management, if you will, is a very key piece of the hydrogen hub development efforts.
Yeah, and Rory, I can say more broadly too. One of the key benefits of hydrogen with carbon management is that not only is it the cheapest way to make near zero carbon hydrogen today, but it's also the cheapest way to do carbon capture. The CO2 emissions from making hydrogen with natural gas are very concentrated in a low cost way to do capture. And so as we think about building out that infrastructure to do the transportation and storage, hydrogen can provide a really important source to provide the CO2 to build that out, which then makes it much more cost effective for lower concentration emitters that are going to have fewer options in the long run to decarbonize, like cement, like paper and pulp, to piggyback off that infrastructure and have ultimately lower costs of capture and enable us to decarbonize both faster and more cost effectively. Flip side of that coin too is the hydrogen demand, that if we're able to supply significant amounts of low carbon hydrogen today coming from fossil generation with carbon capture and storage, that creates the market where there is that customer for low carbon hydrogen. And over time, as the price of that green hydrogen or non-fossil zero carbon hydrogen comes online, there's a customer willing to pay for it. And we do expect that the green hydrogen will come down in costs substantially as deployments happen over time. So it's really an important near-term market creation on both the carbon capture and the hydrogen side. That's an important component of the value proposition.
Thanks. No, that's very helpful framing. And so I'm going to ask, I think, maybe one more question, then I'm going to turn it over to audience Q&A here. But more broadly, I mean, it's very clear the Department of Energy has made tremendous strides in the last year on carbon management, really thinking about point source, transportation, storage, conversion. What should folks listening in expect from the department in the next year in 2024? Maybe Todd, I can start with you on that one.
Certainly. I think, we've kind of hit on it a couple places. One, it's time to start getting these projects up and moving, getting through negotiations, moving forward. We mentioned there are some other parts of carbon management that We're still working through project selection, some pilot plants and things like that, certainly moving forward. But I think, what we hope to see next year is projects awarded, complete negotiation awarded, and moving on and starting to see not only do projects start moving, what do community benefits look like? Let's start learning our lessons, start refining our processes. But these are multi-year projects. The DAC hubs, I think you heard earlier, is probably 10-year projects. But this will get that project, that process started. And so I think you'll see a lot more sort of progress in that area. And frankly, I think you'll see the Department of Energy out in communities more as we're moving into these realms of engagement, stakeholder briefings, things like that, moving forward.
Yeah, and Roy, I'll also build on that to say that the entire DOE team and the national labs as well that have been working on carbon management over the past really 2 years at this point, it's been a Herculean effort to get money out the door with as much rigor and pace as the team have. And it's been just incredibly heartening to see now we have initial funding opportunities out the door for every single one of the infrastructure law provisions related to carbon management. That in and of itself, I think, is giving us the opportunity to say, as Todd mentioned, once we start to select some of projects through all of these efforts, and we start to see more and more projects advance just on their own, working their way through the EPA's Class 6 queue to take advantage of that 45Q tax credit that's been increased. We'll start to understand where projects are emerging, and it will give us an opportunity to really step back and synthesize how we can support the emergence of not just clusters and hubs of carbon management projects, but really industrial decarbonization clusters around the United States. And I think you'll see a lot more from us about how we want to encourage industry as a whole to decarbonize, and not necessarily to think about carbon management as the tool, but as a tool in order to advance our economy-wide goals of getting to net zero by mid-century.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much, both Noah and Todd, for joining me at the fireplace, for having this conversation, and for being collaborators across the department and all of our work on carbon management. I'm going to call back some of our colleagues earlier, actually, to answer a couple of questions from the chat, but would love you to hang out in the wings and answer questions as they're appropriate. And then I'll call Noah back at the end to close us out. But again, thank you so much for all of your hard work and all of your office's contributions on carbon management. And again, happy Carbon Management Day. And so, Mark, I was curious if I could call you back for a quick question about carbon conversion. We're getting a lot of questions in the chat about some of the products that folks can expect to see from carbon conversion, but also some of the work that our department is doing. I was wondering if you could talk about some of those initiatives.
Yeah, thanks, Rory. So there's a number of products when we're thinking about CO2 conversion. The primary one that we're seeing for more ready commercial development has been CO2 mineralization into building products. This was coming through things such as that we saw with the Carbon X Prize several years ago, seeing conversion of CO2 into minerals. We're seeing a lot of that through our portfolio as well. I think when we're thinking about some of those longer term items or things that might still be early stage development, are things such as combining, say, CO2 with renewable generated or low carbon generated hydrogen into fuels and chemicals, things like sustainable aviation fuels and various pathways. Been doing here at DOE, we've been doing a lot of research on those different pathways. But more recently, what we had announced over this past year was something called that was funded through the bipartisan infrastructure law, where the carbon utilization procurement grants. So these are grants for state and local entities where they can apply to acquire products that are low carbon or produced from CO2 from CO2 themselves. So looking at things on the demand side as well as including the technology development part.
Awesome. Really, really helpful. Now I want to transition a bit. We're getting a lot of questions also about, we've talked about carbon oxides throughout this conversation. We're getting a lot of questions about methane. What are some of the pieces of fossil energy and carbon management's work that are thinking about sort of upstream leakage, mitigation? What are some of the other pieces of the carbon management puzzle, not just thinking about capture?
Yeah, Roy, it's a great question. And we recognize that when you're talking about carbon capture on fossil sources, the ultimate carbon impact of that depends not just on what happens to the combustion emissions, but the entire cradle to grave life cycle, from extracting that fossil fuel, transporting it, and then making sure that once the capture happens, the transport and storage is permanent. And so DOE is really thinking about that entire value chain, and it really prioritizing how we can make sure that we are supporting both the tools to prevent methane leakage from extraction and transportation, but also to encourage and incentivize industry around the world to demand low carbon scope 1 and 2 emissions associated with any existing and fossil fuel production going forward. It's a key focus of the climate negotiations that we have here going on right now in Dubai. That a few years ago, the methane pledge was announced, and it continues to be a key area of focus where DOE is collaborating across the US government and with many other allies around the world to make sure that we are first and foremost eliminating any of the leakage that we can as we start to transition away from fossil fuels.
Great, really, really helpful context. Thank you, Noah. And maybe I'll invite Kelly and Mary Ellen back briefly just to talk a bit about how there's quite a few questions in the chat, I think, just with respect to how civil society voices and community voices can be heard on some of these projects. I was hoping that you both could talk about some of the efforts DOE is doing to engage with folks early and where their voices can be heard.
Sure. Yes, well, I already talked about some of the engagement activities from this year, but last year we also went out into communities and we hosted a series of community centered workshops, one in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Corpus Christi, Texas, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the Tri-Cities in Washington. And there's a report available on our website regarding what was discussed in those workshops. So I encourage you to go to the FECM's website, the domestic webpage, to check that out. But yeah, that's also another thing that we're going to do in the wake of the Houston dialogue, is to do a report out of everything that was discussed, in addition to making full recordings of the event available. It's really important to close that feedback loop after you do these events, and make sure that communities and who participated, and then folks who didn't participate but who are interested in having access to the deliverables that are produced from these events. So Kelly, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, at a project level, I have a couple thoughts to share. I think something that Sarah had, articulated in her slides about that methodical phase design of these projects means that community benefit plans are required for every stage. And I think the opportunity here is that long before construction starts, there's community benefit planning integrated into project design. So there's opportunities for those early engagement and also research and analysis to happen to make sure that benefits and these plans align with community priorities. So there'll be engagement activities happening throughout every stage of these projects. And then the second piece is to be involved in the community benefit plan review process. Many folks might have this expertise. We can share the link to the DOE-wide webpage where you can apply to be a reviewer, not just on FECM or carbon management projects, but projects across the Department of Energy's portfolios. Those are two opportunities or ways to think about participating in the deployment process.
Great. Thank you both so much for the hard work in facilitating that dialogue. Well, I'm going to close this out and pass back to our Deputy Assistant Secretary, Noah Deitch, to close out our Carbon Management Day webinar here. But again, just wanted to thank all of you for tuning in. Noah, I'll pass it to you to close out.
Rory, thank you. And thank you to everyone on the team here at DOE for a wonderful webinar. Where I'd like to close on our last minute here is really to extend the invite to folks in this community to please engage with DOE. I get the privilege of working with an incredibly dedicated and talented set of civil servants every day here working on carbon management, and they are all committed to engaging with the community. Please don't wait for the next carbon management webinar. Reach out to us. There are job opportunities, whether you're looking for internships, fellowships, or full-time opportunities. We're eager to hear updates from the community, so please email us and tell us about your advancements and accomplishments. And please do even save the date for the first week of August, where we're going to have not just Carbon Management Day, but Carbon Management Week around the NETL's annual carbon management program review. And so we're going to continue to have events like this and really encourage you all to engage with us. Please reach out. And we're very excited to continue the hard work ahead, but the very important work of making sure that a carbon management industry that supports the communities, environment, and workforce can emerge in the next decades here in the US, and are eager to work with you all to make that happen. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your carbon management day, and look forward to continuing the conversation soon.